March 1945. A small town in Pennsylvania. Morrison's pharmacy glowed under fluorescent lights like a temple of plenty. 3 German prisoners of war stepped through the door, their hands still shaking from the truck ride, their minds still bracing for cruelty. What they saw instead stopped them cold. Glass shelves overflowing with lipstick in 20 colors. Comic books spinning on a rack. Superman, Captain America, bright as candy. And there, at the soda counter, a teenage girl in a poodle skirt, sipping a chocolate milkshake through a striped straw, reading Archie comics like the world wasn't on fire. Liesel, the nurse, dropped to her knees. Not from pain, from understanding. Because in that moment they realized the terrible truth. Germany had been bombed to ash. Their families starved in cellars. Their brothers died on frozen fields. And here, teenagers drank milkshakes and read about heroes. This wasn't a nation barely surviving. This was a nation that had never even noticed. If you want to hear more untold stories that will change how you see history, hit that subscribe button. And drop a comment. Where in the world are you watching from? March 1945. The back of the U.S. Army truck smelled like canvas and diesel and fear. Greta Weber sat with her wrists bound loose enough not to cut circulation, but tight enough to remind her what she was now. A prisoner. 28 years old, former Wehrmacht signals operator, prisoner number 2847. Her hands rested in her lap, the same hands that had decoded radio transmissions for 3 years, that had typed coordinates and troop movements, that had helped send orders across occupied Europe. Orders that killed Allied soldiers, orders that moved men like chess pieces until they stopped moving at all. She stared at those hands and waited for what came next. Execution, probably. Torture first, maybe. She had been taught what Americans did to prisoners. The propaganda films had been explicit. The officers had been clear. If you are captured, they will not follow the Geneva Convention. They will make examples of you, especially women. Especially women who worked in communications, who knew things, who could be useful. Greta was ready for it. Almost wanted it. At least then the waiting would be over. Beside her, Liesel Hoffman sat silent, her eyes fixed on nothing. 22 years old, former Luftwaffe medical auxiliary, thin as a rail and pale as milk. She had not spoken since they loaded into the truck 6 hours ago. On Greta's other side, Ankie Richter sat with her shoulders squared, jaw set, hands folded like she was waiting for a bus instead of her own destruction. 35 years old, former supply coordinator, the oldest of the 3. The strongest maybe, or just better at pretending. The truck slowed. Greta's stomach dropped. This was it. But when the canvas flap pulled back and light flooded in, she saw something she had not expected. Clean wooden barracks arranged in neat rows, gravel paths, a flagpole with the American flag snapping in the wind. No gallows, no execution yard. Just a camp that looked almost orderly. An American officer stood waiting, 40-something with tired eyes and a Purple Heart ribbon on his chest. He spoke through an interpreter, an older man with a German accent who translated the officer's words into careful, formal German. The officer's name was Captain Walsh. He explained the rules, Geneva Convention protections, beds in the barracks, 3 meals a day, 80 cents per day in wages for work details, mail privileges, Red Cross packages. Greta did not believe a single word. This was the torture, the psychological kind. They would offer hope, make her believe she might live, might be treated like a human being, and then they would take it away. That was how you broke someone. Not with pain first, but with hope first. Then pain. She followed the guards to the barracks, Liesel and Anka behind her. The building was simple but clean. Bunk beds with thin mattresses and wool blankets, a stove in the corner, windows with real glass. Greta chose a bottom bunk and sat down slowly, testing whether this was real or whether the bed would collapse or whether a guard would laugh and drag her back outside. The bed held. That night she lay awake, listening to Liesel cry quietly in the bunk above her. Anka slept across the aisle, or pretended to. Greta stared at the ceiling and waited for the other shoe to drop. 3 days passed. No beatings, no interrogations, no torture. The food arrived 3 times a day, carried in by prisoners on work detail and supervised by bored young guards. Breakfast was oatmeal with sugar and milk. Real milk, not the watered-down substitute she had drunk for 2 years. Lunch was soup with actual meat in it and bread. White bread, soft and fresh. Dinner was stew and potatoes and sometimes even dessert. Canned peaches. Cake. Ankie wept the first time she tasted sugar. Just sat there with a spoonful of oatmeal halfway to her mouth and cried silently, tears running down her face while Greta and Liesel pretended not to notice. The guards were young, 18, 19, farm boys and factory workers in uniforms that still looked new. They spoke English too fast for Greta to follow, but their body language was easy to read. Bored, tired. Some of them looked at the prisoners with curiosity, some with indifference, a few with something that might have been pity. None of them looked like they wanted to hurt anyone. One guard, Private Miller, was almost friendly. 19 years old with a farm boy face and an Ohio accent, the interpreter said marked him as rural Midwest. He showed them how to use the camp canteen, a little store where prisoners could buy toiletries and snacks with their wages. He pointed at items and said the English words slowly. Toothpaste, soap, comb. He called them ma'am, all 3 of them, like they were customers in a shop instead of enemy prisoners. Greta did not understand it. Any of it. She lay in her bunk on the 4th night and felt something she had not felt in years. A tiny, fragile, impossible thing. She felt like maybe she would survive this. Maybe they were not going to kill her. Maybe the rules they said they would follow were rules they actually meant. It was the most terrifying thing she had ever felt. Because hope, she knew, was the cruelest weapon of all. Week 2 arrived and the pharmacy trip came without warning. Captain Walsh announced it during morning roll call. Approved prisoners could take supervised trips to the nearby town of Sharon, for medicine, he said, for toiletries, for personal comfort items. His voice was matter-of-fact, like this was normal, like taking enemy prisoners shopping in American towns was something that happened every day. Greta, Liesel, and Ankie were approved. Model prisoners, the interpreter explained. Quiet, cooperative, no trouble. They boarded the truck with 6 other women, all of them silent and tense. Private Miller drove, his rifle propped beside him, but his manner relaxed, almost cheerful. He hummed along to a song on the radio, something bright and brassy that Greta did not recognize. They drove past farmland, still brown from winter, past houses with white picket fences and front porches, past children playing in yards and dogs barking at the truck as it passed. No rubble, no craters, no ruins. Greta had not seen an intact town in over a year. Every city she had passed through in Germany was broken. Hamburg bombed to ash. Berlin a landscape of broken teeth. Even small towns cratered by Allied raids or Soviet artillery. She had forgotten what normal looked like, what a place untouched by war looked like. They parked in front of Morrison's Pharmacy on a street lined with shops. A hardware store. A dress shop. A diner with red vinyl booths visible through the window. People walked past on the sidewalk. A woman pushed a baby carriage. 2 men in suits talked outside the bank. An old man swept the sidewalk in front of his store. Life. Ordinary life. Like the war was something happening on another planet. Private Miller opened the truck's back gate and gestured for them to follow. The pharmacy door had a bell that chimed when they entered. The sound was bright and cheerful and completely wrong for what Greta was feeling. And then the world broke open. The store glowed with light. Fluorescent bulbs bright as daylight, maybe brighter, no shadows anywhere. Glass cases lined the walls displaying lipsticks in 20 colors, rouge compacts, bottles of perfume with gold caps. Shelves overflowed with soap still in wrappers, shampoo in glass bottles, face cream in jars, toothpaste in boxes. A spinning rack near the counter held comic books, their covers blazing with color. Superman flying through the sky. Captain America punching someone. Wonder Woman standing with her hands on her hips. Heroes in red and blue and gold. At the soda fountain counter, a teenage girl sat on a chrome stool. 16, maybe 17. She wore a blue poodle skirt and a white blouse and saddle shoes. In front of her sat a tall glass with chocolate ice cream and milk mixed together, a striped paper straw poking out the top. She sipped from it while reading a comic book. Archie. The cover showed teenagers at a beach, laughing. A radio behind the counter played jazz, soft and easy. The girl looked up when they entered, looked at them for a moment, 8 women in threadbare prison clothes with a U.S. Army guard. Then she looked back down at her comic book and took another sip of her milkshake. Like they were normal, like this was normal. An elderly man in a white pharmacist's coat stood behind the counter. He smiled. His voice was kind when he spoke, the interpreter translating. "What can I help you ladies with today?" Liesl dropped to her knees. Just dropped, like her legs had stopped working. She knelt there on the pharmacy floor, her hands pressed to her mouth, and started crying. Not sobbing, not making noise. Just silent tears streaming down her face while her whole body shook. Because in that moment, Greta understood too. They all did. They had been lied to. About everything. Germany was ash. Berlin was rubble. Hamburg was ruins. Greta's mother's letters described 7 families sharing one cellar, eating soup made from grass and water, burning furniture for warmth just to survive another day. Liesl's little brother Klaus had starved to death at 14 while the radio blared about their imminent victory. Anki's daughters had died of typhus in a refugee camp while officers promised the war would be over by Christmas. And here in America, teenagers sat in pharmacies, drinking milkshakes and reading comic books about heroes. This was not a nation on the brink of starvation. This was not a people sacrificing everything for survival. This was not even a country that looked like it was fighting a war. The shelves were full, the lights were bright. The girl wore new clothes and drank chocolate milkshakes on a Tuesday afternoon like it was nothing. Like abundance was normal. Like peace was normal. Germany had thrown everything into the fire. Every man, every resource, every scrap of food and fuel and hope. They had been told they were fighting for survival, that the enemy was coming to destroy them, that they had no choice, and the enemy had been drinking milkshakes the whole time. The enemy had never mobilized, had never truly sacrificed, had fought the war with one hand while the other hand kept the soda fountains running and the comic books printing and the teenage girls safe enough to worry about beach parties and school dances. Greta stood frozen in the middle of Morrison's pharmacy, holding a comic book she could not read, staring at the bright colors and the impossible abundance, and understood with perfect, terrible clarity. We never had a chance. They fed us into the fire and we never had a chance. This nation could have crushed us with its full strength and it never even had to. It fought us with its left hand while its right hand made milkshakes. Private Miller helped Liesl to her feet, his face concerned but not unkind. The pharmacist brought her a glass of water. The teenage girl glanced over again, curious now, then went back to her comic book. Anka bought toothpaste with shaking hands. Liesl bought soap. Greta bought nothing. She just stood there holding a Superman comic book, staring at the girl with the milkshake, and felt the last pieces of her old world crumble into dust. Back at camp, the 3 women could not speak about what they had seen. Not yet. The words felt too big, too dangerous. The other prisoners, older women and bitter ones, muttered about American propaganda, about tricks, about psychological warfare designed to break their spirits. But Greta, Liesl, and Anki knew what they had felt in that pharmacy. They had felt truth crack through lies like light through a broken wall. Spring came to Pennsylvania. The camp assigned them to the garden detail, a plot of land behind the barracks where they grew vegetables for the mess hall. Tomatoes and beans and lettuce, carrots and squash and herbs. The work was simple and repetitive and strangely calming. Dirt under fingernails. Sun on shoulders, seeds turning into something living. Private Miller worked alongside them, not above them, not watching from a distance with a rifle, but actually working. He showed them how to test soil drainage, how to stake tomato plants, how to pinch back basil so it grew bushy instead of tall. He taught them English words while they worked. Shovel, hoe, earthworm, sunshine, rain. His German was terrible. 3 words he had learned from the interpreter, but he tried. And when he did not know a word, he would point and pantomime until someone understood and everyone laughed. One afternoon in late April, Anki asked him a question through the interpreter. "Why are you kind to us? Your brother died fighting Germany. Why do you not hate us?" Private Miller sat back on his heels, dirt on his hands, and was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "War's over for you. No point in hate." His voice was simple, like he was stating something obvious. Like mercy was the default and cruelty required justification instead of the other way around. Greta did not know what to do with that. She had been raised to believe that strength meant dominance, that weakness invited destruction, that the world was a place where you conquered or you were conquered, where you crushed your enemy before they crushed you. But here was this farm boy from Ohio, whose brother's body had never been recovered from Omaha Beach, treating enemy prisoners like human beings because hate would not bring anyone back. The mail came on a Thursday in early May. Liesel received a letter from her mother in Hamburg. The yellow envelope was thin, the paper inside thinner. Her mother had written in tiny script between the lines to save paper, cramming as many words as possible into the small space. Liesel read it sitting on her bunk while Greta and Anki pretended to be busy with other things. The letter described 7 families sharing one cellar, eating soup made from grass and water and sometimes tree bark, burning furniture for warmth, then floorboards, then anything that would catch fire. Her mother wrote about neighbors who had disappeared, taken by Soviet soldiers, or dead from starvation, or just gone. She wrote about finding Klaus's body in the rubble of a collapsed building. 14 years old. He had not died from the bombs, he had died from hunger. Just stopped, his body finally giving up after months of slow starvation. Her mother wrote, "But we are told we are winning. The radio says victory is near." Liesel folded the letter carefully and placed it under her pillow. She did not cry. She had no tears left. She just lay down on her bunk and stared at the ceiling while Greta's heart broke for her. That night, Greta lay awake thinking about the pharmacy girl with her milkshake, thinking about Klaus starving in Hamburg, thinking about the lie that had eaten them all alive. 2 weeks later, Captain Walsh announced a movie night. The camp had a projector and a screen, and once a month they showed films for the prisoners. Educational films, mostly. Farm safety, English lessons. But this time, Walsh said, they were showing something different. A movie called It's a Wonderful Life. It had been dubbed in German for Italian prisoners at another camp, and someone had sent a copy. The women gathered in the mess hall after dinner. The projector clicked and whirred. The film started. Greta watched the story of George Bailey, a man who wanted to leave his small town and see the world but kept getting pulled back by duty and obligation and family. A man who gave up his dreams over and over to help other people. A man who finally broke under the weight of it all and stood on a bridge ready to jump. And then the angel showed him what the world would look like if he had never been born. Showed him all the lives he had touched, all the good he had done without even realizing it. Showed him that his small, ordinary, frustrated life had mattered more than he knew. The ending came, and George Bailey ran through the streets of Bedford Falls shouting Merry Christmas, and everyone he had ever helped showed up at his house with money and love and proof that he was not alone. That community meant something, that helping each other meant something, that one person's kindness could ripple out and change everything. Greta cried. Sat there in a POW camp in Pennsylvania and cried while watching a movie about a man who almost gave up but was saved by the people who loved him. Because she realized this is what they believe in. Community, helping. The idea that we are supposed to take care of each other. And we tried to destroy it. We tried to burn this down. After the movie, walking back to the barracks under spring stars, Liesel said quietly, "Do you think it is real? What we saw in that movie? Do Americans really live like that?" Private Miller, walking nearby, overheard through the interpreter. He said, "Most try to. Don't always succeed, but we try." Greta lay in her bunk that night and thought about a girl drinking milkshakes, about Private Miller mourning his brother but choosing kindness anyway, about Captain Walsh following rules even when he did not have to, about a movie where the whole town showed up to save one man. She thought, "We were taught that mercy was weakness, that kindness was for fools, that only the strong survived. But maybe strength was choosing mercy when you did not have to. Maybe power was restraint. Maybe the truly strong were the ones who could crush you but chose not to." Summer arrived, and with it came small freedoms that felt like miracles. 3 months at Camp Shenango, and Greta had gained 10 pounds. Her hair had grown long enough to braid. Her hands had stopped shaking. She received her wages every week, 80 cents a day, adding up in her account at the camp office. Real American money that could buy real things. One Saturday in June, she stood in line at the camp canteen with Anke and Liesel. They had saved their wages for weeks. Anke bought toothpaste first, then soap that smelled like lavender, then face cream in a small jar. Practical things, necessary things. And then, standing at the counter with 2 quarters still in her hand, she bought something completely impractical. A Hershey chocolate bar in brown paper wrapping. She had not tasted chocolate in 3 years, had not even seen it in longer than that. The woman at the canteen register smiled and handed it over like it was nothing, like chocolate was something anyone could have anytime they wanted. That night in the barracks, Anke unwrapped the bar slowly, carefully, like it might disappear if she moved too fast. She broke off 3 squares, one for each of them. They ate it sitting on Greta's bunk, letting it melt on their tongues, silent and reverent. Liesel spoke first, her voice barely above a whisper. "My brother died for this." Anke shook her head, fierce and sudden. "No, he died because we were told we had to take this from them. We were told they had stolen what should be ours. We were told we were starving because of them, but they had plenty all along and we were just lied to." Greta closed her eyes and tasted chocolate and felt the truth of it settle in her bones. Klaus did not die for chocolate. He died because the lie needed him to, because the system that raised them required blood to sustain itself, because admitting there was enough, that sharing was possible, that the enemy was not actually an enemy but just other people living their lives, would have meant admitting the war was pointless. And pointless wars do not get soldiers. Pointless wars do not get compliance. So they made it meaningful with lies. July brought heat and longer workdays in the garden. Private Miller taught them more English, talked about his farm in Ohio, about his mother who raised dairy cows, about his father who had fought in the First War and came home broken but still kind. He showed them a photograph of his brother Thomas in uniform, smiling, 19 years old and already gone. Omaha Beach, body never recovered. One afternoon, kneeling in the tomato rows, Miller said something to Greta in English. She did not understand all the words, but caught enough. "Brother, lost, sorry." She looked up at him, this American farm boy with dirt on his hands and grief in his eyes. He was saying he was sorry for her loss. She had mentioned her 2 brothers once, weeks ago, both dead on the Eastern Front. And he remembered. And he mourned them. An American soldier mourned her German brothers who had been trying to kill his. Greta broke, just sat there in the dirt among the tomato plants and cried while Private Miller looked away to give her privacy, and Anke put a hand on her shoulder and the summer sun beat down on all of them. Captain Walsh announced a camp talent show in late July. The war in Europe was over. Japan was collapsing. Repatriation would happen eventually, maybe by winter, maybe sooner. Until then, Walsh said, we are all just people waiting to go home. Might as well make the time bearable. The prisoners organized themselves. Some women had been teachers and offered to give English lessons. Others had been seamstresses and mended clothes. A few had been musicians. Greta, Liesel, and Anke volunteered to sing. Old German folk songs. Not military songs, not propaganda, just songs about rivers and mountains and small villages. Songs their grandmothers had taught them. Songs that had nothing to do with the war. They practiced in the evenings after work, 3-part harmony, their voices blending in ways that felt like coming home. Anke had a low, steady alto. Liesel sang soprano, clear and bright. Greta carried the melody in between. The talent show happened on a Saturday night in the middle of the camp, with a makeshift stage built from wooden pallets and lights strung between posts. Italian prisoners performed from their section of the camp, singing opera. Japanese prisoners from the other facility sent a delegation that performed traditional songs. And then it was their turn. They sang about the Rhine River flowing to the sea, about spring coming to mountain meadows, about a young woman waiting for her love to come home from far away. Their voices rose into the Pennsylvania twilight and carried over the camp and beyond the fences into the countryside where fireflies were just beginning to light up the fields. American guards stood listening. Some had their caps off, held over their hearts. A few wiped their eyes when they thought no one was looking. After the third song, Private Miller called out a request. Could they sing Lily Marlene? The song both sides had sung during the war. The song about a soldier saying goodbye to his girl under a street lamp, not knowing if he would ever see her again. A song that belonged to everyone who had ever been far from home and afraid. They sang it. And the American guards sang with them, stumbling over German words they did not quite know, humming when they could not remember the lyrics. German women and American boys under Pennsylvania stars singing together about loneliness and longing and the universal ache of being far from the people you loved. For one evening, they were not enemies. They were not captors and prisoners. They were just people who had survived a nightmare and were trying to find their way back to being human again. Greta stood on that makeshift stage and felt something impossible. She felt grateful. Grateful to be alive. Grateful for this strange grace, grateful that mercy had found her even though she did not deserve it. August 6, 1945. The camp woke to news that an atomic bomb had been dropped on Hiroshima. 3 days later, another on Nagasaki. August 15th, Japan surrendered. The war was truly over. Every front, every theater, every battle. Done. The prisoners waited for repatriation orders. Rumors circulated daily. Ships were being prepared. Processing centers established. They would go home by Christmas, someone said. By Thanksgiving, said another. By October if they were lucky. Home. The word felt strange in Greta's mouth. Heavy. She was not sure what home meant anymore. Hamburg was rubble. Her mother's letters came less frequently now, the postal service in chaos. The last letter had described the British occupation zone. Orderly, her mother wrote, fair even. But Germany was split now, American zone, British zone, French zone, and the Soviet zone in the east. The stories from the Soviet zone were not good. Forced labor, reprisals, starvation worse than during the war. Greta tried not to think about it, tried to focus on the garden, on the routine, on the strange peace of this in-between time. Then the new prisoners arrived. They came in trucks one morning in late August. SS officers, hardcore Nazis, men who had been hiding in the chaos after the surrender, living under false names, trying to blend into the refugee streams. American intelligence had caught them. War criminals, some of them. Others just true believers who had refused to surrender even when their own government had. They were segregated from the regular prisoners, housed in a separate barracks with tighter security. But during mealtimes, during processing, during the inevitable bureaucratic mixing that happened in a camp holding hundreds of people, contact was unavoidable. Sturmbannführer Heinrich Keller, 41 years old, gaunt and hard-eyed, a man who looked at the world like it had personally betrayed him. He had been an SS, administrative officer on the Eastern Front. Greta recognized him from Berlin headquarters. He had passed through her signals office twice, maybe 3 times. He remembered her, too. The first time their paths crossed in the mess hall, he stared at her with open contempt. Later, during afternoon recreation time in the yard, he stood with a group of his allies and spoke loudly enough for everyone to hear. Collaborators, he called them. Women who had accepted American comforts, who had taken their wages and bought their chocolate and sung their songs for the enemy. Traitors to the fatherland. He looked directly at Greta when he said it, at Liesel, at Ankie. Ankie turned away, shoulders tight. Liesel went pale. Greta felt ice in her stomach. That evening, Keller approached their table during dinner. He stood over them, radiating contempt. You think they will remember your cooperation when you go home. You think it will protect you. But people will know. We will make sure they know. Collaborators do not get to forget what they did. Captain Walsh intervened, had Keller removed, issued warnings, but the damage was done. The poison was in the water now. 2 nights later, someone ransacked their barracks. Greta came back from the showers to find her bunk torn apart, her letters scattered, the small bar of lavender soap she had saved crushed on the floor, the comic book she had kept from the pharmacy visit, pages ripped out and crumpled, Liesel's things destroyed, Anka's few possessions thrown around the room, a note on Greta's pillow written in German in harsh block letters. Traitors will be judged at home. Greta sat on the edge of her bunk and stared at the note. Her hands started shaking again, the way they had when she first arrived. The pharmacy felt like a dream now. The singing, the garden, Private Miller's kindness. All of it just an interlude. A pause between one nightmare and the next. Because Keller was right. She would have to go home, and home was full of men like him. Men who would rather burn the world than admit they had been wrong. Men who needed someone to blame for their loss, who would find that blame in anyone who had shown weakness, who had adapted, who had accepted mercy from the enemy. She stopped eating, stopped talking, moved through her days like a ghost. Liesel and Anki tried to help, but they were terrified too. They whispered at night about the Soviet zone, about reprisals, about what would happen when they returned to a Germany that was not just destroyed but occupied, divided, bitter. One morning in early September, Captain Walsh found Greta sitting alone in the garden at dawn. The tomatoes were nearly done for the season. The beans had been harvested. Everything was ending. He sat down beside her on the ground, which officers were not supposed to do, did not say anything for a long time, just sat there while the sun came up over Pennsylvania. Finally, Greta spoke. "I do not want to go home. There is nothing left. There but lies and ghosts." Walsh was quiet. Then he said, "You cannot stay. You know that." She nodded. "But you can choose what you carry home. You can carry the lies or you can carry the truth. You can carry hate or you can carry what you learned here." Greta looked at him. This tired American officer with his purple heart and his rules and his strange, stubborn decency. He told her a story about fighting in North Africa, in Italy, in France, about watching his best friend die at Anzio, about coming home to find his wife had left him, his son did not remember him, about nightmares and guilt and anger that did not end just because the shooting stopped. "But I get to choose who I become after," he said. "The war does not get to decide that. I do." He showed her letters from German prisoners he had guarded at other camps, sent after they went home, thanking him, saying his dignity had helped them keep theirs, saying they remembered that an American officer had followed the rules when he did not have to. "You have a choice," Walsh said. "Carry the lies home or carry the truth. But either way, you have to carry something. Make sure it is worth the wait.